Welcome, everyone. My name is, as they mentioned, is Rohit Sani, and I lead a team of PMs here at Palo Alto focusing on SaaS security. Today's topic is about a specific product within SaaS Security Suite, or CASB, known as SaaS Inline. And we are going to talk a little bit about what it is, what problems it solves. Prior to that, actually, what are the problems that we're trying to solve in general within the industry, and then how we hone in on that with risk assessment, curation, and control. So that is what the next, let's say, half an hour or so looks like. As they mentioned, there will be a Q&A session, so hold your questions if you don't mind till the end, unless you put them into the chat, and we'll go ahead and address those as best we can towards the end of the session. In terms of background, just for myself, I have been at Palo Alto coming up on a year. Prior to that, I've spent the last 10 plus years in product management. Prior to that, in a variety of different factors, support, business development, program management. But I have been in this security space now for quite some time, since 2016. And so I've seen the evolution of what we're going to talk about here, which is the explosion of SaaS, the explosion of applications that you use to be productive. And because of that, I'm sure you're seeing this, we see this internally as well with our own InfoSec and our own usage, is that more and more enterprises are not only consuming SaaS applications, and they have a lot of what we call sanctioned applications, those that are approved by say an IT organization for the use in a corporation enterprise for productivity. But beyond that, the explosion of data access that is unmanaged. It's really just unwieldy to be able to keep track of everything. And because of that, even though there are approved, acceptable use policy approved SaaS applications that an enterprise says you can go off and use, for example, a cloud storage vendor, a sales environment, perhaps an HR system, there's still the explosion of unmanaged data, unstructured data, and shadow IT, as we traditionally know it, those that are not under the purview of an IT organization. Because of all that, continued new targets, right? 81% of organizations have exposed sensitive data without knowing it. A variety of nuances to this, as you can imagine. Some of it could be because of unsanctioned or tolerated applications, those that are not approved by, say, the IT organization. Otherwise, it could just be because of the explosion of SaaS to SaaS traffic, plugins. It also could be because of tenants. There's a variety of corporate and personal usage of applications, and it's very, very difficult and challenging to be able to manage that, let alone even discover those applications. As a heads up, we'll talk a little bit about that today and how our solutions can help you solve that problem. And because of all that, obviously, we are talking about this because security is key, and there are more and more targets, attack surfaces that will be exposed and do get exposed as a result of what may be a legitimate use of SaaS applications. Credential management, posture security, as I mentioned, SaaS to SaaS traffic, plugins. You use something like Slack, for example. Slack could be connected to Salesforce, and you may not realize that maybe there are some settings there within that app-to-app, cloud-to-cloud communication that are exposed. Or maybe there's some legacy or dormant settings. Perhaps there's even settings that Salesforce has come up with that have just not been configured yet by InfoSec or an IT department that leaves some exposure. A simple one could be login. You know how sometimes you go into an application and you are disabled or logged out of it after a certain period of time. Well, those are settings that could be applied on the admin side of things. If those remain stale and you are not logged out, that could be an attack vector. Very simple example of posture security management. So all of this is obviously transforming our industry. It's hard to keep track of all of this. And because of that, it creates these unique security challenges. If we step back a little bit, Cloud Access Security Broker, CASB, as you probably heard of it, started out being just the policy enforcement point, the security policy enforcement point between you and the cloud. And so as a result, you had this traditional approach of bucketizing applications, as I spoke about. Typical organization, small, medium business, to even large, thousands of unsanctioned applications, or shadow IT applications. Making sense of those into what is sanctioned, tolerated, or risky unsanctioned was often how we would approach that problem. By the way, it still applies. That's still perhaps the first step that a lot of organizations go through. And as we talk with CISOs and other customers, we also understand that there is this aspect of visibility, monitoring, maybe alerting, and then finally control. And so when you look at things like control, you want to know about your applications. What are the app capabilities? Do they allow for upload, download, share, or other actions? How do they comply with your needs? How do I assess the risk of that application? And ultimately, how do I secure my most sensitive data? So this was the traditional approach to Cloud Access Security Broker, CASB. For those of you who've been around for a little bit and saw the dawn of the CASB age probably about 10 years ago, there were also these 4 pillars that we talk about. And they were visibility, compliance, threat protection, and data security. All those still apply. However, there's nuances, as I mentioned at the top of this conversation, where we need to get deeper. We have to look at how that attack surface that may have been simpler in the past has evolved because SaaS evolution, because connectivity, because SaaS app traffic has also evolved, and the way that we as consumers use these applications has become more sophisticated. Because of all that, those existing approaches just fail to address all these challenges. And so this is really a summary of what I've been talking about already. When you look at the traditional controls for CASB, it misses a lot of attack surface. The app itself, it ignores posture security. It sometimes ignores identity hygiene. And what we mean by that is oftentimes you'll hear people say identity is the new enforcement point because you have to authenticate, authorize, but you could have users and groups in the organization that have access to applications that may be heightened access than perhaps you even knew. Let's just say someone in engineering has access to GitHub and repos. That's great. But now they get access to Salesforce because they needed it for some project. Did someone go back and actually shut off that access? What sort of access did they give that engineer leader to Salesforce? Was it sensitive data? What does that look like? That's very hard to manage oftentimes, and people tend to forget, just human error. That is an example of identity hygiene. How do we surface that? How do we make that apparent? And how do we help you maybe remediate that? With the example of, say, like a dormant account after X months, does that just go stale or does that persist? So attackers are sitting by and they're figuring that out. They're looking at all of these surfaces and the fact that they have more holes to play effectively. And all of this is happening way before you may care even about the sensitive data, right? Certainly, PII, PHI, credit card information, etc. That's all arguably structured data. But when you look at unstructured data, you look at videos, you look at chat, you look at collaboration apps, you look at images. A lot of examples of unstructured data that you have to parse, scan, and monitor that perhaps traditional DLP solutions don't do a great job of. How do we expose that ultimately to be able to show you where the sensitive data lives, where the crown jewels live, and what you need to keep tabs on? So securing modern SaaS requires a different approach. It is a deeper approach to discovery and control, as we'll talk about. It's looking at configurations and perhaps misconfigurations in popular SaaS applications or posture security so that you can manage those. It's obviously preventing attacks before they happen, malicious insiders, also protecting your organization from insider threats or human error, as we pointed out. All things that are legitimate, that happen in any organization. One of the things that I would often ask our audience when we talk at conferences like RSA or things like that is how many people have made the mistake of using a personal instance of a SaaS application by mistake? And oftentimes, a lot of people would be shy to maybe raise their hand or admit that. But I'd be the one that raised my hand and say, yeah, I've done it with Google Drive. I use it personally, and I use it in companies that I've worked at. And at times, I have shared something by mistake with a personal tenant that I didn't mean to. I took that back and corrected it, but it's an easy mistake to make. And whether it be through that means of cloud storage or through communications like Gmail or personal box, Dropbox, etc., it's something that a lot of people do and confuse. And so that is some transparency that you need. That's an example of user activity or maybe even insider threat that was not meant to be perhaps a threat, but rather just a mistake. And ultimately, as we talked about, protecting data everywhere across all these applications is always paramount. So what we're going to now talk about, transition into, is our solution, the SaaS security solution that we offer. And before I go into the specifics of the Shadow IT SaaS Inline solution, just as a setup, within Palo Alto, from an architectural standpoint, SaaS security sits somewhat in between. It functions as a very good control point for integrations with NGFW and Prisma Access. So regardless of what solution you're using, perhaps both, we have enforcement on both of those levels. That's the granular controls that you see towards the middle here. But you also have the ability to make sense of your data or to look at traditional sanctioned applications. So what I'm talking about, like you can see here, is Slack, Box, Gmail, Salesforce. They may be your approved applications within the organization. And for those, you may want to scan and monitor them from a traditional API standpoint. You may want to look at posture security from a SaaS security posture management standpoint, or you may want to just look at the visibility of those applications, the tenants, the risk, the attributes, the latter of which we'll talk about in this presentation, and make sense of that. Now, that may be the minority of the applications you have. The majority of them may actually be unsanctioned, tolerated applications, as you can see in the bottom cloud there, ones that you're knowing of that you may want to monitor or flat out just block. So that is how our solution sits for SaaS Inline. To get a little bit into the specifics, as long as you have a firewall set up, you probably have access to Cortex Data Lake. That is where the logs come in. We parse those, we make sense of those, we look at the tables associated with those, and that is how we produce the visualization and the product experience that you see in SaaS Inline, which we will talk about very shortly. All right, so let's get into it. Visibility and control of all SaaS usage. So on the right-hand side, you have our SaaS security solution. And ultimately, what we're looking to do is give you visibility into all the applications, the risk, and allow you to make sense of it. Now, that can mean a variety of different things. At a baseline, our app index has actually grown to over 61,000 SaaS applications. So that is what we can discover depending on what your environment produces or what you're using. And as you can see, even in the screenshot, you have the application name, you have relative risk associated with it, what category it may fit into, and the ability to look at usage, upload, download data, for example, the number of users using those applications, and then some choices in terms of operations. The ability to tag, sanctioned, unsanctioned, tolerated, apply custom tags. I found this application on XYZ date on August 16th, 2023, or it's owned by ABC individual within our organization. Contact them to get access. A variety of different examples of how you can custom tag applications. How do we source those applications? Machine learning, crowdsourcing. You can provide us feedback, which we'll get into a little bit here as well. And we do that not only for North America, but throughout the world. And then ultimately, you can make sense of that by controlling your shadow IT, monitoring user activity, and then ultimately then putting some rules around that or controls, blocking access or specifying granular controls. So that is a solution in a nutshell. It has been around actually for a couple of years, and I've been working on this product with our team for coming up on about a year. So I'm happy to share with you some of the things that we've been working on in the last 6 months. We've been busy at work with a lot of feature development and what I call velocity with respect to our application cloud engine. ACE is what it's called, to give customers like yourself more transparency into a variety of different things. And that's why I want to share with you in this presentation here, which is customers have come to us and said, Rohit, we need more details around risk. We need more apps. We also need better risk scoring. So just at the top half here in our Q1 of this calendar year, so when you look at January, February, and March timeframe, around then, one of the things that we prioritized very highly within our team, and this team would include our product team, engineering, and our research team that does a lot of this work, is revamping the risk scoring. We had some issues with risk scoring that we wanted to correct. That required going into the deep ends of not only what are popular applications that our customers are using, but also how we evaluate the weights of those risks and what are popular applications, your top, say, hundreds of applications, your Amazons and Googles, Workspace and Microsoft, et cetera, that most customers are using. And what does our risk look like with respect to that? So those are some tweaks we made on our end from a quality standpoint. And I'm happy to say that we've, I think, come a long way in improving that so that the popular apps that you expect to use have low to medium risk, that you don't have something that just kind of raises your eyebrows to say, well, I didn't think that was a high risk application. I wonder why Palo Alto thinks it to be the case. Now, with that said, we also give you granular controls and weighting. So if you don't like our risk score, you can change it at a personal tenant level. You can change it at a global level based on compliance. We'll talk about that in a bit as well. To round out the top half of this particular feature highlight page, we did a attribute refresh for those top priority apps that I just mentioned. The second half of the first half of this year, I guess, quarter two, springtime and beyond in North America, we look to innovate in a variety of different ways. Our customers were often telling us, well, I have feedback on your risk score, or you're missing certain attributes, or I don't see applications in this part of the world, in Singapore, in Japan, in Australia, that are popular to us, but I don't see that in your engine. Why is that? Well, we thought that we should obviously listen to our customers and get as much real-time feedback as we can. So we introduced something called product feedback loop, which I'll preview to you as well. We just shipped that in the last few weeks. And so you can provide that feedback to us in the product. It's something that we noticed we did not have, and frankly, there's no reason not to have it. So that is something that we've now introduced. Beyond that, each of your tenants, when you go into look at the app dictionary, is personalized based on what applications we see. That was not always the case, but now you see that based on usage and the apps that are most popular being used when you first come into SaaS Inline. We've also done some work around documentation, which I'll share with you probably at this time with respect to frequently asked questions. So if I just exit out of this for a second here, if I clicked on that link, it'll bring us to our tech docs. And one of the things that we've added to our SaaS Security Administrator Guide, which I do encourage all of you to take a look at if you haven't already within tech docs. So that would just be docs.paloaltonetworks.com. You can go to SaaS Security and you can see all this helpful information. We have documented not only all the attributes, which we'll also get into in a second here, that we expose for our specific application. We've also provided some justification for how we look at those attributes and how often we update them. Effectively, it's based on our sprint cycles, which are a couple of weeks, but we are always refreshing not only the applications, the library, the attributes, but also looking at the feedback that folks like yourself can now provide us via the feedback loop and republishing that. Truth is, we're probably doing that on a weekly or bi-weekly basis based on our sprints, but certainly on a monthly basis, we're doing a lot of attribute refreshing. So that is what this particular document here goes through in terms of how we do this, the secret sauce, how we evaluate it, etc. I encourage you to take a look at that on your own time, and you can find that, as I said, here in the SaaS Security Admin Guide. Beyond that, the other thing I wanted to point out is that we've extended our app attributes. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in our next slide, where I have some screenshots around how the attributes that we provide, we can go deeper into. Data retention, HTTP security headers, TLS encryption, etc. How do we expose that and give you more details so that that correlates to a better risk score, hopefully a lower risk score, or perhaps one that you can then deem, hey, that doesn't fit my compliance requirements. Perhaps I need to evaluate this app or consider whether we should adopt it as a sanctioned application or not. So on the left-hand side here, this looks perhaps familiar to you because I just showed it on the docs page. This is our compartmentalizing of attributes. So we have created 3 sections: compliance, which, as you can see, summarizes your traditional SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO, GDPR, HIPAA certifications, and whether the application that you're deep diving into complies to that or not. We've also segmented identity access management, so you can take a look at an app's authentication or access control capabilities. As you can see here, do they offer multi-factor authentication? SAML, is there a password policy? Do they publish that? Is there role-based access and control? And then finally, security and privacy, which you have a little bit of a screenshot of on the right-hand side, and that gets into data at rest, retention, disaster recovery, data ownership. So what we're doing here is we're looking at a few different things. We actually crawl a lot of these applications and parse it, and based on machine learning, figure those things out. But we also do a lot of manual work, especially for the top applications that our customers are using, to verify that these things are true. In fact, this is probably a good excuse to click through on this attribute, application attributes, which I have here as another tab, to show you what I mean by that. So there's a deep dive page on application attributes, as you can see here, and all the attributes that we collect, from NPS score to privacy policies to compliance attributes, a lot of which may be acronyms that we're not familiar with, you can look up here. So you can see what they mean, why we have them in our product itself. But what I want to highlight that we've been spending some time on, specifically our research team, is these areas here. If you look maybe a couple of months back, we had data ownership as a tick box. Based on the SaaS app's terms and conditions, do they show you, who has rights over the data? Now we've gone a little bit deeper to say, is it customer ownership? Is it the actual app vendor that owns your data, or is it unknown? Likewise with data retention. If you take a look at that, when you are putting your sensitive data out there in an application, oftentimes there's ambiguity. How long is that organization or app actually retaining my data? Is that for a month? Is that for a year, etc.? We've gone a little bit deeper there to expose that. And in the UI, you can now see the specific details of that if that exists for the application that you're deep diving into. Likewise, you see that for encryption at rest or encryption in transit. What TLS protocol do we support? Does that application support? So our research team is going in and producing that information and sharing that with you. And so that's really the net result of what I was sharing here in the bottom right-hand screenshot. You can roll over, take a look at that, and see what those details look like. That's all natively built in to our product. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the in-console app feedback. So we just released this, as I mentioned, a couple of weeks ago. In the product itself, you can go in, click on this eye bubble on a variety of pages, and provide us feedback on anything from risk scoring to categorization to attributes to apps themselves. Missing apps, or perhaps we got something wrong about a specific app that you discovered in your environment. Allow me to just exit out of this and pull up a little video that one of the PMs on our team produced on this, and I'll kind of talk through it here. So if I play this, this is, oh, that's weird. 1 second. Let's hope this works better. Yeah, there we go. So you click on applications, you see the eye bubble there. And right there, I'll just pause here. You have the ability to provide feedback on a variety of different types effectively. So you can see here, risk score, adjustment, maybe we have an attribute that's out of date, something incorrect, or you want to request a new application itself, you can go ahead and pick the right category. One bit of feedback, we'll probably add a general item here as well if you have just general feedback. That was some input that we got from our technical marketing folks. So you can go in and put the details in there and submit that within the product itself. That then goes to our app research team that will look at that. We actually even have the ability to parse that information on the back end from a product management standpoint, and we go ahead and act on that. So that's a feedback loop that we produced for folks like yourself to provide us that input. And as I said, that's something we recently did based on input from our customers and things that they're looking for. So with that, I'm going to continue on and now transition a little bit to not what we have done, but some additional things that we are looking to do in the near term, and kind of talk at kind of a broad level of where we're headed with SaaS security and some of the other problems that customers like yourself are coming to us looking for help. So first one is something called tenant controls. Tenant controls is sometimes traditionally known as the difference between corporate and third-party or personal instances. So customers like yourself are coming to us and asking for this full visibility, but also granular controls around these tenants. And what is the difference between a corporate tenant versus a third-party or personal tenant? And how do I eventually, control my environment and make sense of it? That goes deeper, of course, because once you have access to discovering those tenants, you may want to apply granular controls, like block personal instances of Box or block uploads to a specific application like SharePoint for specific, let's say, Active Directory groups. These are all built into our policy flows, as you can imagine. And so first, it's incumbent upon us to discover these applications, then allow you to control those. So happy to say that this is something that we have actually worked on. It's kind of a phased approach where we have more and more applications that we'll support over time based on some of the technical details. This is on the cusp of being shipped. So I didn't put it into the shipped section of this presentation because it is not live yet. It actually should be live any day now. We're basing it on a PanOS release that's coming out, 10.2.5, in case you're familiar with that. And then soon enough in Prisma Access with the 4.3 release that's coming out. And that will also be in this current quarter. So I believe the timeline for that is somewhere around October. Once we have that, you will see this natively built into the SaaS Inline product. But for today, let me give you a quick preview of what that will look like from an experience standpoint. So when we take a look at it, number one, we will discover tenants and they will show up in the tenants column in the product itself. So you might have an application name, as you can see here, like SharePoint. You see, hey, we discovered 2 tenants of SharePoint. Now you may want to make sense of that and say, okay, well, let me help identify, are those tenants for SharePoint actually corporate, personal? We may make a stab at it from a product standpoint, but we won't get it right because we don't know which specific tenants those are. So you have the ability as a admin to go in and tag that tenant type or apply a custom tag to it, as you can see from the screenshot here. Once you've done that, you then want to go in and specify perhaps policies for that. You do that very similar to what you do today. However, with tenant controls, you not only can provide a application level policy, but now you have in the UI a tenant level policy experience. So when you see that, you click in, and now within policy recommendations, very similar to what you have today, you have the ability to identify the application. So let's say it's Slack, and now you have specific tenant types. You can expose those tenant types and apply your block controls and specifically granular controls to those tenants. The example you see here in the screenshot is that we've gone in and we've blocked on the ability to create anything in 2 specific Slack tenants, in this case, 23andMe and external PanW as it's named. So these 2 tenants have been identified, and the action to block any sort of create capability on those tenants is being enforced. So that, in a nutshell, is how easy it is to discover, tag, and then control those applications from a tenant standpoint. Our first phase will have a lot of popular applications like SharePoint, like OneDrive, like Box, etc. As we move through the journey, we'll support more and more applications, discover more and more applications, so you have these tenant level controls at your disposal. With that, I want to end with just the road ahead, some things that we're working on that are big rocks that our customers are coming to us and saying, hey, we need some improvements in these areas. We're looking for more efficiencies, or we're just looking for more productivity from your product. And this is where I'd love to get your feedback in the Q&A section if you have any for me. So no particular order. One of the things that we're working on is policy improvements. For those familiar with the product itself, in case you've dabbled in it, you know that our policy flow is a recommendation that goes to either Prisma Access or NGFW. We are looking to improve that. In fact, we have a proposal to simplify that and make that into a one-step enforcement as opposed to a policy recommendation that needs to get imported by a NetSec admin or a web security admin. So that is one of the things that we're teeing up to improve, not only from a user experience standpoint, but also just from an enforcement standpoint. Why? Because our CASB admins today in the product have to make that recommendation, and it has to then be imported by perhaps another persona like a WebSec or NetSec admin. In a small, medium operation, you may be the one and the same, and that may get annoying where you have to go from one UI to another to be able to import and sync and configure rules. So that's why we're looking for some efficiencies there. Other areas, for those familiar with Cloud Access Security Broker and obviously the evolution of SaaS security, SSE, SASE, there's a lot of work being done around suspicious activity. What I mean by that is it's one thing to discover applications, to show you the users using those applications. It's another to be able to go a little bit deeper into, well, that's abnormal activity. Let's just say Tina from HR has access to a bunch of salary information in your organization. Great, she's doing her work as normal, but perhaps now she starts copying a lot of that salary information or downloading a bunch of information in a short period of time. That may be suspicious. We have some things we do today in the product around suspicious user activity or user entity behavior analytics, as it's known, but we're going a lot deeper with machine learning, with abnormal activity, and tying that to even privilege misuse or least access. And so this goes all part of the journey around zero trust, as you can imagine, but without using all those buzzwords. The problems we're trying to solve are really who has access to what, should they have access to it, and now does that access exceed perhaps some sort of threshold or baseline behavior as compared to one's peers or one's job function. If that looks suspicious, it's incumbent upon us as a product and a security team to expose that to you, maybe alert you of that, and allow you to now make sense of that. So that's an area that we are heavily investing into and looking to innovate around and expose within our product. A couple other things. One area that we get a lot of feedback around is user experience and operations. What do I mean by that? Well, as I was showing you some of the screenshots, you can see that, for example, even looking at attributes, there's some things we can do there to expose, is it HIPAA GDPR certified, rather than you having to kind of deep dive into there and take a look at the check marks. Custom tagging, bulk tagging. One of our customers that we were speaking to a few months back actually went through the effort of showing me how challenging it was for them to be able to custom tag applications when they had hundreds of them. It's one thing to do it for a couple of them and click a couple buttons. It's a bit more challenging when you have groups or hundreds of applications that you want to bulk tag in some specific way. We can do a better job there. I acknowledge that. So those are some of the UX and operation aspects that we're looking to improve within our product. And then finally, but certainly not least, automations. We are lacking today some things like scheduled reports, which our customers are asking for, not only for inline, but also API. That's on our roadmap. Providing some more automations around the applications that we discover, how we can maybe auto tag them based on strong hypotheses that we have. Give you an example. If we have information from Okta, from CDL, Cortex Data Lake, and we have a strong hypothesis that maybe Salesforce, Box and Gmail might be your sanctioned applications, why can't we auto tag them for you and surface that as a first-time user experience or as part of the onboarding experience? Can we also make a good, strong hypothesis around unsanctioned activity or high-risky applications? Perhaps this gets into default policies, which we offer today, but we don't offer them based on your industry or your geography. Can we do a better job there? These are all the sort of things that we're trying to surface as problems we want to solve based on input from folks like yourself. So these are some broad strokes around policy, user activity, user experience and operations, and automations that we're looking to innovate around within our product.